There are amazing machines in the cell which are really staggering in terms of their complexity. The way that those machines came about indicates that you can't just have one without a whole set of other machines with them. One of the most famous, of course, is the bacterial flagellum, which is actually nothing compared with a more recent one which has been found, which is a 7-tailed flagellum, which requires 24 little wheels in order to control it, such that there are cogs operating the 7 tails, but also other cogs going round in the other direction to stop the whole thing rotating about itself. There are other machines where you've got walking proteins, right? The kinesin walking protein is an amazing example of engineering right down at the molecular scale. There are also other examples. The DNA itself is made by what's called DNA polymerase. Now, DNA polymerase is a protein, and yet the DNA codes for all proteins, including, get this, DNA polymerase. So in order to get DNA, you need DNA polymerase. And yet in order to get DNA polymerase, you need DNA. So which one's coming first? It's chicken and egg problem, except right down in the molecular scale. So everything is telling you that there is irreducible complexity involving not only machinery, but in coded information on that machinery. Get this, that DNA itself is placed on nucleotides which have weak chemical bonds to their nucleotide pair on the other side of the DNA. You've got the coding part of DNA and the other mirror part of DNA on the other side. So the message carrying part of DNA is on one side of the well-known ladder that you get in the double helix, and then you've got the other non-message part of DNA. So guanine is actually linking up with cytosine on the other side, and then you've got adenine on one side linking up with thymine on the other side. Or if you're dealing with RNA, that becomes uracil, but that's a detail. So now, when you look at all this chemistry of the order of these chemicals, it's the order of the chemicals which determines the information which is being carried. And yet, the way the DNA operates, it's operating using chemicals and hardware, and yet it's the software which carries the meaning. So there's no chemical reason why the DNA should actually be in the order that it is in, right? Now, this machinery gets even more complicated when you realize that there is no biochemical reason why the DNA should zip up in the particular order in which it's found. Indeed, there's a lot of biochemical reasons why it shouldn't. Let me give you this. When you actually consider the DNA carefully, why does the DNA polymerize? That is, how do you get actually the string of lots and lots of nucleotides? Now, on the message-carrying side of DNA, you might have cytosine, adenine, thymine. CAT spells cat to me, but cat, of course, spells go and get a particular amino acid and add that amino acid to all the other amino acids to make a protein, right? Now, I'm not talking primarily now about the nucleotides, but the nucleotides are connected to a sugar phosphate bond, right? Now, that sugar phosphate bond is linked with cytosine for the C. That sugar phosphate bond is linked with adenine for the A, and that sugar phosphate bond is linked with thymine for the T, right? Now, the actual chemical which makes that sugar phosphate bond will not actually connect with the one above it unless you get a special molecule come along, which is called adenosine triphosphate. The adenosine triphosphate is a very unstable molecule, but it's absolutely necessary in order to get the DNA to what we call polymerase. That is, add the next sugar phosphate on. It won't happen on its own. It has to get to a raised free energy state such that the end of the DNA is in a triphosphate mode, which doesn't want to stay like that. It's unstable. It wants to come down again to a monophosphate, right? But in a triphosphate activated state, it then wants to combine with another phosphate, which is added onto it, and then it relaxes down to a monophosphate again. Are you with me? So every time you want to polymerize, you have to bring along a triphosphate from the ATP, which then enables the DNA to polymerize. That's how you make DNA. Well, the point I'm making is that the thermodynamics of that process is incredibly complicated and sophisticated, because the adenosine triphosphate, ATP, it's commonly known as, ATP is itself an unstable molecule. And yet we must have ATP in order to polymerize the DNA, in order for the DNA to make the amino acids which make the proteins. But ATP itself is manufactured by an incredibly complicated process which enables ATP to exist in an environment which is telling you it shouldn't exist, right? On its own, everything just breaks down and ATP couldn't exist. So you've got here thermodynamic marvels, which, for want of a better term, I will call machinery. And the machinery could not have arisen without all the other machines round it in order for that particular machine, ATP in the case that I was looking at, to exist. And yet that is absolutely essential to make DNA. And DNA is essential in order to have the program, which is written to do with triplets of nucleotides. And yet, where is the information in the system? The information is in the non-material order of the nucleotides. So this leads me to a very, very important conclusion. The information is non-material, and it's not defined by the matter on which it is written. All computer scientists know this. Information is not defined by the matter on which it's written. I'm using English. The English is not what defines the message that I am speaking. And neither is the coding that I'm using to make the English words, the sounds. That's not defined by my larynx. It's not defined by any process of chemistry in my body. I'm not uttering noises because of the peas that I ate a few hours ago, right? Otherwise, you would say that there was a non-rational cause for what I'm saying at the moment. The very fact that I am actually speaking and that I'm saying words is not because of the food that I've ate. That just simply feeds the machinery of making these words, which is the larynx. And for those who are listening to me, that's the ear that, it feeds all the amazing mechanisms in the human ear for you receiving what I'm saying. So I'm using that as a parallel for what's going on with the cell. In the information in the cell, where is the information? The information is non-material. And yet the evolutionist tries to tell me that information is defined by the matter and energy which is in the cell. No, it's not. The information is transcendent to the matter and the energy. And this is a very, very vital point, and one on which, by the way, I've written in the literature. If you want to look it up, there's a paper in Design and Nature in 2009, which actually refers to this very point, that is it a top-down or a bottom-up explanation of information? So there is much evidence thermodynamically within the DNA coding machinery of life and all the machines in our cells, which tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made.